Maybe you should stick to what you know, Nathan. Leave the strategy to people who understand business. My name is Nathan Pierce. I'm 48 years old and I've been writing code that keeps hackers out of Fortune 500 companies for the past 18 years. The kid who just told me to stay in my lane is Preston Walsh, 29, fresh out of Stanford with his MBA and about as much real-world cybersecurity experience as my college sophomore daughter. He's also the son of our board chairman, and I was about to make him very, very sorry. I was sitting in the CyberGuard Technologies conference room at 7:15 p.m. on a Thursday, October 12th, presenting the final security audit for our biggest client deployment ever, First National Bank's complete digital infrastructure overhaul. The room was mostly empty except for Preston, his cousin Olivia Walsh, who somehow got promoted from marketing intern to strategy director last month, and me. I'd been debugging authentication protocols since 5:30 a.m. because their banking systems couldn't afford a single vulnerability. Preston was scrolling through his phone while I explained how our AI-driven threat detection had prevented 1,247 intrusion attempts in the past week alone, including 3 sophisticated ransomware attacks that would have cost First National approximately $85 million in damages and regulatory fines. Right, he said without looking up. But what's the ROI on all this technical complexity? Our investors want to see streamlined operations, not overcomplicated systems that require expensive specialists to maintain. I stared at him for a moment. This was the same system that had just saved our client from the kind of breach that destroyed Equifax's reputation and cost them $700 million in settlements. But explaining cybersecurity fundamentals to someone who measured success in PowerPoint metrics seemed pointless. Olivia chimed in with her usual helpful insight. Couldn't we just outsource this to one of those cybersecurity firms in India? I researched it last week and we could cut operational costs by 68% while maintaining the same security standards. I closed my laptop slowly. The patents for our core AI framework are filed under my name. Without those specific algorithms, you'd be outsourcing an empty shell that any halfway competent hacker could bypass in about 20 minutes. That got Preston's attention real quick. What do you mean your name? Everything developed here belongs to CyberGuard. That's standard employment law. I mean, I developed these algorithms during evenings and weekends over the past 5 years using my own equipment and my own research because I saw vulnerabilities in existing systems that nobody else was addressing. The legal transfer to the company is scheduled for December 15th after my annual performance review cycle. Preston and Olivia exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. I'd seen that same expression in countless corporate meetings over the years, the look of people who think they've found a loophole to exploit. Well, obviously everything you've built here belongs to CyberGuard, Preston said, his tone shifting to something more authoritative. That's how employment contracts work in the tech industry. Your personal time doesn't matter if you're using company knowledge and solving company problems. I packed up my things and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, I could see them huddled together with Preston's phone out, probably calling their legal team to figure out how to claim ownership of my work before December. The drive home through Seattle's evening traffic gave me time to think about how we'd gotten to this point. I joined CyberGuard when it was still called Pierce Security Solutions, yes, named after my family. My older brother Alan had started the company in his garage back in 2006 after getting laid off from Microsoft during one of their restructuring phases. I was employee number 3, fresh out of the University of Washington with a computer science degree and enough student debt to motivate serious dedication. Alan stepped down as CEO 14 months ago when his pancreatic cancer diagnosis made it impossible for him to handle the stress of running a rapidly growing company. The board brought in Margaret Walsh, Preston's mother, from McKinsey to professionalize operations and prepare for our IPO launch, scheduled for spring 2024. Margaret lasted exactly 7 weeks before the board realized she had no understanding of cybersecurity beyond whatever buzzwords she'd picked up in consulting presentations. Her suggestion to pivot toward blockchain-enabled security solutions with enhanced customer engagement metrics during her first all-hands meeting became legendary among the development team for all the wrong reasons. When Margaret stepped down, the board faced a choice: promote from within or bring in another outsider who'd need months to understand our technology. That's when Margaret suggested her son Preston, who'd just finished his Stanford MBA with a focus on technology management. The board figured family connections plus business education might bridge the gap between technical complexity and strategic leadership. They were wrong. Preston brought Olivia on board 6 weeks later as part of his strategic modernization initiative. Her background was marketing internships at consumer retail companies, but Preston sold the board on her fresh perspective and outside industry insights. What she actually brought was a complete inability to understand why our cybersecurity solutions cost more than basic antivirus software. My 9 patents covered everything that made CyberGuard competitive in the enterprise security market. The real-time threat analysis engine that could identify and neutralize zero-day exploits within 180 seconds of detection. The adaptive encryption protocols that automatically strengthened security barriers based on threat sophistication levels. The machine learning algorithms that studied attack patterns and predicted vulnerabilities before hackers could exploit them. Without my frameworks, CyberGuard was just another overpriced consulting firm selling basic firewall configurations and password policies. I'd filed those patents myself using Tony Brennan, a patent attorney I'd met at a University of Washington alumni networking event 6 years ago. Tony specialized in intellectual property for tech startups and had advised me to maintain personal ownership until I could negotiate proper compensation that reflected their actual market value. The 9 patents fell into 3 categories. 3 covered my adaptive encryption methods that could strengthen security protocols in real time based on attack sophistication. These were worth approximately $12 million each in licensing value based on comparable patents in the cybersecurity space. 4 patents protected my machine learning threat detection algorithms that could identify new attack patterns 340% faster than existing industry standards. Market analysis suggested $8 million per patent. The final 2 patents covered my zero-day exploit prediction framework, which was completely unique in the market and potentially worth $25 million each. Total estimated value, $127 million. Standard practice was to transfer patents to the company after they fully vested, but I'd been waiting for the right moment to negotiate equity compensation that reflected their actual contribution to CyberGuard's competitive advantage. Our enterprise clients paid premium rates specifically because our security solutions were 5 to 7 years ahead of anything else available. What I hadn't anticipated was Preston and Olivia's plan to push me out before December 15th. The next morning, October 13th, I found an email waiting for me with the subject line, Organizational Evolution, Strategic Transition Plan. It was from Preston, sent at 11:47 p.m. the night before, probably right after their phone consultation with whatever legal team was advising them. The email outlined a new technical leadership structure that would take effect November 30th, exactly 2 weeks before my patent transfer deadline. My role was being evolved to focus on legacy system maintenance and documentation, while strategic technical vision would be handled by Dr. James Morrison, who they'd apparently hired away from Carnegie Mellon's cybersecurity research department. I looked up Morrison immediately. Impressive academic credentials, 47 published papers on theoretical security frameworks, and exactly 0 experience building real-world systems that had to stop actual hackers from stealing actual money. He was the kind of researcher who could explain why something might work in theory but had never had to debug authentication failures at 3 a.m. while a Fortune 500 client's entire digital infrastructure hung in the balance. My salary would remain at $185,000 annually, but I'd be reporting to Morrison instead of having direct access to executive decision-making. More importantly, all strategic technical decisions would go through Preston's approval, effectively making me a senior technician rather than the principal architect of our core technology. I called Tony immediately. They're trying to sideline me before the patent transfer. What are my legal options? Nathan, this is actually more straightforward than you might think. Those patents are still your property until December 15th. If CyberGuard is using your technology without a formal licensing agreement, that's patent infringement regardless of your employment status. But I'm employed by them. Doesn't that create some kind of implied license? Not for patents filed before your current contract. There's a specific clause in your 2019 contract renewal that covers future inventions, but your patents predate that language. Legal gap in their coverage. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, but the kind of cold clarity I'd learned to recognize during my divorce 3 years ago when my ex-wife's attorney tried to claim half ownership of patents I'd developed before we were married. How quickly could you draft a cease and desist order? Give me until tomorrow morning. But Nathan, if you do this, there's no going back. You'll be burning bridges with people who could make your life very difficult in the Seattle tech community. Tony, these people just tried to demote me so they could steal $127 million worth of my work. The bridges are already burned. That afternoon, I started conducting a detailed audit of exactly what I'd contributed to CyberGuard's platform over the past 18 years. The results were more extensive than even I'd realized. My threat detection algorithms processed every single security event for all 47 of our enterprise clients. Every login attempt, every file transfer, every API call went through frameworks I'd designed and implemented. Without them, our clients would be using security systems roughly equivalent to what banks used in 2015, adequate for basic threats but hopeless against modern cyber attacks. My encryption protocols secured 100% of data transfers between our platform and client systems. I developed these specifically to address vulnerabilities in standard TLS implementations that most cybersecurity firms either didn't understand or couldn't afford to fix properly. My AI prediction frameworks powered the early warning systems that gave our clients 48 to 72-hour advance notice of emerging threat patterns. This capability alone was worth our entire annual contract value for most clients. They could prepare defenses before attacks materialized instead of just responding after damage occurred. I had essentially built the technological foundation that made CyberGuard competitive against companies 10 times our size with 50 times our resources. But the deeper I dug into company communications, the clearer it became that Preston and Olivia had been planning this move for longer than I'd suspected. 3 weeks earlier, Preston had requested that the entire development team document all technical processes and create comprehensive system architecture diagrams. He'd framed it as a routine knowledge management initiative to prepare for our IPO due diligence process. I'd even volunteered to lead the documentation effort because I thought it demonstrated professional leadership. 2 weeks before that, Olivia had asked for administrative access to our code repositories for what she called a strategic analysis of development efficiency and resource allocation optimization. I'd granted the access myself, figuring the COO's cousin should have visibility into our technical operations. Looking back through system logs, I discovered that someone had been systematically copying files from our shared development drives to external storage locations for the past month. When I'd flagged this to our IT security team in early September, they told me it was authorized by executive management for backup and disaster recovery purposes. Now I understood what had been happening. They'd been methodically documenting and copying everything I'd created so they could continue using my work after pushing me out. The plan was probably to claim that my patents were derivative works based on company resources, making them company property regardless of when they were originally filed. I found an email thread between Preston and someone at Caldwell & Associates, a corporate law firm specializing in intellectual property acquisition. The thread was dated September 8th, exactly 6 days after Preston officially started as COO. The subject line read IP consolidation strategy, minimizing developer leverage in pre-IPO environment. This wasn't about reorganization or operational efficiency. This was a calculated plan to steal my life's work. I spent the weekend researching Preston and Margaret Walsh's backgrounds more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. Margaret's previous position had been at Blackstone Restructuring Partners, a consulting firm that specialized in distressed asset optimization for private equity acquisitions. Before that, she'd worked for Greystone Capital, a venture capital firm that focused on buying struggling tech companies and extracting maximum value from their intellectual property portfolios before reselling them. She wasn't brought in to grow CyberGuard. She was brought in to strip mine it. Preston's Stanford MBA thesis, which I found archived in their business school database, was titled Optimizing IP Acquisition in Technology Transitions, a framework for maximizing asset value during leadership changes. The 47-page document was essentially a playbook for legally seizing intellectual property from technical employees during corporate restructuring. They'd done this before, multiple times. On Monday morning, October 16th, I called Tony again and explained what I'd discovered. He listened carefully, asked several pointed questions about the timeline and documentation, then delivered news that changed everything. Nathan, based on what you're telling me, you don't just have grounds for a cease and desist order. You potentially have a case for conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft under Washington state corporate law. The systematic documentation and copying of your work, combined with the restructuring timeline designed to coincide with your patent transfer deadline, suggests premeditated intent to defraud. What would happen if I revoked their access to my technology right now? Legally, you have that right. Your patents are still your property, and they're using your technology without a formal licensing agreement. Practically, it would probably crash their systems until they could develop alternative solutions, which could take months or years, given the complexity of what you've built. I looked around my home office, thinking about Preston's dismissive comments and Olivia's suggestion to outsource everything to India. I thought about my daughter Sarah, who was finishing her computer science degree at UC Berkeley and planning to enter the same industry where people like Preston and Olivia could steal years of her work with an MBA and family connections. How quickly could you draft the cease and desist order? I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. Do it. Tuesday morning, October 17th, I arrived at the office early and began implementing what Tony and I had discussed during our 2-hour phone conversation the night before. The cease and desist order would be delivered to Preston at 10 a.m., giving me a narrow window to prepare for the consequences. My first step was changing all the passwords and access credentials for the external servers, where I hosted the core algorithms that powered CyberGuard's security framework. I'd originally set up this architecture as a security measure. Keeping the most sensitive code on systems I controlled meant that even if CyberGuard's internal networks were compromised, our core IP would remain protected. Now it gave me leverage I hadn't fully appreciated. At 9:45 a.m., I sent an email to the entire development team explaining that I would be conducting routine maintenance on the authentication and threat detection system starting at 11 a.m. These kinds of notifications were standard practice, and nobody questioned them. At exactly 10 a.m., I watched through the glass conference room wall as a courier delivered a legal envelope to Preston's office. He opened it, read the contents, and I could see his face go through several distinct phases: confusion, disbelief, anger, and what looked like genuine panic. Within 3 minutes, Olivia was in his office. Within 5 minutes, they were both on the phone, probably with Caldwell and Associates trying to figure out their legal options. At 10:30 a.m., Preston's assistant called my extension asking me to come to his office immediately for an urgent strategic discussion. I politely declined, explaining that I was preparing for critical system maintenance and couldn't be interrupted without risking client security vulnerabilities. At 11 a.m., I remotely disabled the authentication frameworks that connected CyberGuard's platform to my patented security algorithms. The effect was immediate and comprehensive. Every user login attempt failed. Every API call returned authentication errors. Every real-time threat monitoring dashboard went dark. Every automated response protocol shut down. Within 12 minutes, our customer support phone lines were overwhelmed. First National Bank called asking why their entire fraud detection system had gone offline. Healthcare clients were reporting that patient data access was completely blocked. Government contractors were demanding explanations for security system failures that potentially violated their federal compliance requirements. Preston came storming out of his office, his face red and his hands shaking. "Nathan, what the hell have you done?" Preston's voice was pitched higher than I'd ever heard it. I looked up from my laptop where I was calmly monitoring system logs and client status reports. "I'm exercising my legal rights as specified in the cease and desist order. My technology is no longer available for unauthorized use. This is sabotage. You're destroying the company. I'm protecting my intellectual property. There's a difference." Olivia appeared next to him, looking like she might hyperventilate. "Can't you just turn it back on? We can work something out. This is affecting real people's security." I met her eyes directly. "You suggested outsourcing my work to India for a 68% cost savings. I'm giving you the opportunity to see how that would work out in practice." The rest of Tuesday was absolute chaos. The development team scrambled to understand why systems they'd been using for years suddenly wouldn't respond. Junior developers were frantically Googling basic authentication protocols that I'd replaced with advanced frameworks years ago. Customer support fielded 347 angry calls by lunchtime. CyberGuard's stock price, we'd been trading on private equity markets since 2019, dropped 23% in after-hours trading when news of the widespread outage reached our investors. Over the next 3 days, Preston assembled an emergency team of contractors and consultants to rebuild our security infrastructure without my patented technology. According to my friend Janet Liu, who still worked in the development department, they burned through $780,000 in emergency consulting fees by Friday afternoon. The contractors quickly realized what they were up against. You can't just replace 18 years of custom algorithm development with off-the-shelf solutions. My threat detection system wasn't just software, it was an entirely different approach to cybersecurity that anticipated attacks instead of just responding to them. Meanwhile, I was fielding phone calls from competitors who'd heard about CyberGuard's technical difficulties. Microsoft's cybersecurity division wanted to discuss licensing my AI prediction frameworks. IBM was interested in my adaptive encryption protocols. Cisco offered to acquire my entire patent portfolio for $95 million upfront plus royalty payments. Friday, October 20th, brought the moment I'd been waiting for. CyberGuard's investor presentation to the private equity consortium that was supposed to finalize our pre-IPO funding round. $150 million in Series D funding hung in the balance, money that would determine whether we could go public in spring 2024. I watched the live stream from my home office while reviewing licensing proposals and drinking coffee that actually tasted good for the first time in months. Preston was presenting confidently about market opportunity and competitive advantages when they reached the technical demonstration portion at 2:30 p.m. That's when everything fell apart spectacularly. The emergency replacement system couldn't handle real-world demonstration loads. Instead of detecting and blocking simulated cyber attacks, the platform let everything through, including basic threats that college computer science students could have stopped. Dashboard displays showed random error messages. Alert systems malfunctioned and triggered false positives every 30 seconds. The AI threat analysis displayed numbers that literally made no mathematical sense. Jennifer Morrison from Sequoia Capital asked the question that ended Preston's career. What happened to the proprietary threat detection algorithms that were specifically mentioned in your prospectus as core competitive advantages? Preston tried to explain that they were experiencing temporary technical difficulties due to routine system upgrades, but after 25 minutes of watching their cybersecurity platform fail to secure anything, the investors started leaving. One investor was overheard telling his associate, "If they can't protect their own demonstration, how are they supposed to protect our portfolio companies?" The funding round collapsed. The IPO was postponed indefinitely. By the following Tuesday, both Preston and Olivia had been removed from their positions. The board issued a carefully worded statement about leadership transitions to better align with technical requirements and stakeholder expectations. Margaret Walsh quietly resigned from her advisory position the same day. By Thursday, I'd signed a $67 million Series A term sheet for my new company, Secure Core Technologies. My first investor was Patricia Anderson from Kleiner Perkins, who told me that watching Preston's demonstration failure had convinced her that the real value was in my patents, not in CyberGuard's corporate structure. Our first client was First National Bank. They terminated their contract with CyberGuard and signed with Secure Core before we'd even finished setting up our Seattle office space. Our second client was Seattle Children's Hospital, which needed bulletproof security for patient data systems after a ransomware attack had nearly crippled their operations the previous year. Within 8 months, Secure Core had 23 major enterprise clients and was generating $47 million annually in revenue. My patents, now properly licensed through my own company, were worth approximately $180 million based on validated market demand. CyberGuard eventually sold to a mid-tier consulting firm called Data Shield Solutions for roughly 12% of their pre-crisis valuation. The acquiring company's first announcement was that they would be completely rebuilding the security platform using industry-standard frameworks, essentially starting over from scratch. Preston returned to venture capital, though his reputation in the Seattle tech community was permanently damaged. I heard through mutual connections that he'd moved to Austin and was focusing on cryptocurrency investments. Olivia left the technology industry entirely and took a marketing position at a retail company in Portland. Neither of them ever publicly acknowledged their role in CyberGuard's collapse, but the Pacific Northwest tech community has a long memory for failed leadership and questionable ethics. When business journalists asked me about leaving CyberGuard so abruptly, I kept my answer simple. Sometimes you have to protect what you've built, even if that means walking away from where you built it. The real lesson was quieter but more important. Experience and competence aren't things you can fake with an MBA and family connections. And dismissing someone because they've been around longer than you is a mistake that compounds quickly in an industry built on actual knowledge and proven results. These days, when I mentor young developers, I tell them what my father told me when I was starting out. Respect is earned through work, not inherited through privilege. Some people learn that lesson early. Others learn it when their demonstration fails in front of $150 million worth of investors.